thank you all for staying online. Let's take a deep breath and energize ourselves for the last session. And I have Nelixa de Luca here with me again. We've been covering a lot of different topics today, all the way from policy to use cases and so on and so forth. So lots of things to pick up on here. So Nelixa, this last discussion, we wanted to talk a little bit about, with all those different topics and what we covered today, where do we actually start? What is a practical point to start at? What do you think?
Thanks, Camilla. Well, that is definitely the big ticket question. And I have to say that the session this morning has given so much insight and food for thought and takeaways that there's lots that we can cover. For me, given my background, the starting point is always going to be that framework. What do you want to achieve? What is the end goal? And then work backwards as to how you get there. And I think one of the really important topics that has been raised today, and I heartily agree with, is this very grown-up conversation about ecosystem management and the commercial incentives. One of the big lessons learned from the UK EU experience is that, as idealistic as it is to have this data provided for free, it does not provide the right incentives to have a well-functioning, thriving, open banking, open finance, open data, wherever you want to be, ecosystem. And so my recommendation to any, jurisdiction looking at this is think about that on day one. I don't have the answer. I don't think we necessarily have an answer in the UK and the EU, but without that consideration of how is the ecosystem supported and how can it grow going forward does need to be addressed very early on in the thinking and the conversation. And aligned to that is, again, where do you want to get to? Are you starting from the sort of top down, consumer data, right, or the bottom up, open banking, open finance, open data? There is merit in both approaches, but I think that given everything we've learned so far, having that vision of where you want to finish will help you build what you need in order to get to that end goal.
But one thing that I just wanted to come up with a question that I've been pondering when I'm sitting and listening to all those amazing speakers, and that is, how different do you think that is where EU and UK is compared to a country like Indonesia, for example? Because the starting points are quite different.
I think one of the biggest differences is expectation understanding from industry. One of the biggest challenges in this ecosystem, and what is absolutely necessary, and various speakers have touched upon it, is trust. We know from the experiences locally here that wasn't there at the beginning. Everybody had to work at it, but that's not just between industry participants. It's actually trust between industry and the regulators, and having that sort of long-term vision, I think, helps that to grow, because everybody knows what is expected. I mean, we're at the moment moving to PSD3, but PSD3 is, going to go to open finance, and then it might go to open data. We don't have that clarity. It's a piece of legislation, as I said before, that's not going to be in place for a number of years. And so we're in this situation now where actually it's going to be up to industry to continue to grow the open banking, open finance ecosystem. And then there's ancillary conversations about what that means for other sectors. And I absolutely concur with the comments already made by various people that, that this sectoral approach with different rules and regulations is absolutely not going to be the right way to go, because it's going to lead to fragmentation. And I throw it out there, food for thought, that maybe rather than talking about open banking, open finance, open data, actually what we should be talking about is access to data. How do we frame a working ecosystem about access to data? Who are going to be the participants in that ecosystem? And then you can frame the supervisory expectations, the authorization requirements, liability around that access to data. Who can access it? Who can use it? And that's something that, I have mentioned before, but I throw it out there to this audience, you know, who may be thinking about where do we start? And maybe it's not to start at open banking or open finance, but it's to start at access, and then think about whether or not your payments functionality, which I think is equally important, because everybody always starts at account information and then adds in payments. You know, I question whether that is actually the right approach. But, you know, think about where your payments framework, your payments initiation framework should sit. And should it sit in, you know, a piece of legislation or regulation or rules or guidance that addresses both? Or does it need to be separate frameworks that have the right connectivity?
Interesting. At this point in time, also talking about this audience, please feel free if anybody would actually like to come on camera and comment or ask Nilixa a question, share what you've been thinking so far. Nilixa, well, see, anybody, just turn your camera on, interrupt, that's fine. Otherwise, I'll ask Nilixa in the meantime, out of different developments across globally, actually, what are the most encouraging things that you're seeing within the open data space, the things that really is going in the right direction and that you think will create momentum and setting the scene right?
So I think definitely not reinventing the wheel, taking the lessons learned from other jurisdictions. You know, that gives you the lessons learned, the what to do, what not to do. I would hope that it also minimizes the cost of implementation. And I think that's very important, you know, for all sectors of the economy and industry. I think that thinking about the different use cases that are coming out in different markets and how that could be applicable to your jurisdiction is going to be really helpful. And then obviously there is this parallel conversation about digital identity. And I think that one of the challenges that we actually see in the UK and the EU is that we don't really have digital identity solutions, not holistically anyway. There are different jurisdictions that do. And I would say that those jurisdictions that do have digital identity have better functioning open banking ecosystems. And I think that's actually played out in what we've seen in Singapore, and then obviously what other jurisdictions are looking to do as well. I mean, part and parcel, and we touched upon this about, you know, right at the very beginning about inclusion and financial inclusion, then I think that that's a key driver in many jurisdictions. So they're not only looking to launch maybe open banking ecosystems, but are looking holistically at their financial services ecosystem and how they improve their own payment ecosystems. You know, and open banking is one piece of that jigsaw, and identity is definitely the other.
Yeah, it's interesting. Our digital identity is that theme through all the work we're doing. It's no project that it doesn't come up, but it's still such a big piece to solve for. And where also interoperability, it will be a leading theme.
Yeah, I think, sorry, can I just add, Camilla, before we move on? I think that moving conversation that we're now seeing to API first is also key. You know, I personally see no reason, except for the limited exemptions that we've touched upon before, why, you know, the screen scraping models need to continue. The security is much better in API first. The data functionality is much better in API first. You can have more holistic, better implemented ecosystems because you can aim for a better consistency of approach. I think the single API would be challenging, but there is a lot to be said about consistency of implementation. So you can have that one-to-many rather than one-to-one. You know, in the UK, we had the open banking implementation entity that was its governance body. I think that, you know, jurisdictions should consider having some sort of body, whether it's their regulator or some other entity that actually owns the management of the ecosystem. And then obviously, as we touched upon, conformance, compliance, but actually that day-to-day, who is responsible rather than everybody doing it bilaterally is going to lead to better outcomes. And I just wanted to, pick up, because I think it's really important what Simone said about liability. within the EU and the UK, we had insurance liability for AIS and PIS providers. Now, whether that has landed in the right place remains to be seen. But we actually had to build and go out, and this is when I was working at the regulator, insurance products, with the insurance industry, because they didn't exist. And I would say that probably this is an area that will be revisited in PSD3, because is insurance the right framework? Is that the right sort of protection within this ecosystem? I believe there is still a question mark over, because it's not, insurance products have excesses and exclusions, and this is not a product in where you want excesses and exclusions if you're talking about consumer protection. And I think that's going to be one of the conversations that does, get traction as we move forward in Europe.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree. It's almost touches on that other topic that comes across all the vertical we're speaking around cybersecurity, something we haven't really touched on today, but it goes hand in hand with those very valuable data sets that sits within all those sectors. And I agree with Brad that we haven't probably imagined what product we can create if we start to cross-use the sector data. So it will be an interesting conversation to have, and we'll continue to have this, Nelixa, in our working group that you're a part of. So it will be more to come. I will see if JC is actually on the call. Yes, to see, call out, I'll call you soon. Nelixa, do you have any last comments you would like to say before I hand over to JC?
No, absolutely. Thank you very much for the invitation and for giving the opportunity to listen to all the very knowledgeable people on the call today.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Nelixa. JC, it's been a great session today. So thank you very much for collaborating and setting this session up. Before I hand over to you, I'll say the content from today, we will work into a report and we will share it with everybody. And we also encourage everybody to get in contact if you have any ideas or if you would take part in the work we're doing in this project and in this field. We're specifically looking at those around use cases. And another topic that we haven't really touched on today, but they came up in the ABAC meeting, JC, that happened back in May, was the what shall I say, to use the correct word here, the challenges around data localization and different regulations around that in the world. And it's something that we're looking at in the EPA working groups also. So JC, I would like to hand over to you now.
Thank you, Camilla. Thank you very much. And so I believe it has been a very fruitful roundtable. And thanks to our speakers and panelists for giving us a clear understanding of what's happening, the current state of play in open banking and open data initiatives across the world, how these are developing in various markets, how regulators are approaching the challenges, how banks and fintechs are navigating these uncharted waters, and potential solutions to ensure interoperability across markets in our region. So I think the discussions have highlighted the importance of coordination and collaboration among the market players and the public and private sectors in order to accelerate the digitalization of finance while achieving interoperability. So I would like to thank you all for your contributions to our discussions. The key outcomes of our previous roundtable on open data have already been incorporated in the draft of the ABAC report to APEC finance ministers, which I have been furiously working on over the past 2 days. And we will be happy to incorporate any additional insights or update from today's discussion that Camilla and her team may wish to suggest. The draft report section in the report to finance ministers on open data provides a reference to the evolution of open banking to open data and various key elements, including the whole of government approach, the recognition of a standard and a level of harmonization for basic elements of open data in order to promote consistency, and allow firms to exchange technology, learnings, and practices globally. Also, the need to address challenges to effective participation of developing economies, such as lack of access to the digital world and insufficient literacy and implementation approaches, that also pay attention to the commercial aspects of open data in order to enable businesses to provide more significant benefits to consumers. That section of the report also makes a reference to the need for coordinated guidance from governments to agencies and private institutions in sharing customer data for the benefit of individuals. And that should be covering agreement on common standards, building the infrastructure, and solving critical legal, technical, and logistical problems. The report also mentions key principles, including those governing privacy, data sovereignty, and individual rights that need to be established to ensure alignment and consistency. The current wording of the recommendation in the report was drafted to be actionable, so for APEC members to encourage actions that would be tantamount to endorsement that then we in APFF and EPA Asia can then follow up to implement in collaboration with interested policymakers and regulators, with the benefit of the political imprimatur from the finance ministers. The text of recommendation itself is as follows. So let me just read the text of the recommendation. We recommend that APEC finance ministers encourage collaboration among the financial industry, international organizations, and relevant public sector stakeholders in member economies to advance the development of open data systems, consistent standards with domestic regulatory control, and common principles of open data that can be applied across the region. As a first step, we suggest that conveners identify use cases to be prioritized for standardization, such as, for example, interoperable digital ID systems and bank account and transaction information, as well as ways to promote implementation of standards in member economies. So that's how it reads. Well, of course, you may have heard about the G20 finance ministers failing to make a joint statement the other day because of disputes over proposed language referring to the conflict over Ukraine. So this could probably also happen at the APEC finance ministers meeting in October. Fingers crossed, ministers will set aside politics to agree on things that are important to the region's economies like open data. But in the very likely event that they won't, we hope to have a chair's statement in the absence of a joint statement, and we will try to work with our APEC finance ministry colleagues, including our colleagues in the Thai Ministry of Finance, to have some kind of an endorsement to help us move forward. So in closing, let me thank our co-organizers, EPA Asia, which is also our host, the ASEAN Bankers Association, and APFF, for collaborating with us in holding this event. My thanks, of course, to all our speakers and moderators for sharing their valuable time and knowledge with us today. So let me also thank all of you for joining us and participating in our discussions. So that's, let me declare on our side this roundtable adjourned. And thank you, Camilla.
Thank you, JC, and thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you soon again.